and it looked exactly like a real newspaper, and he saw one of his own descriptive articles in it, and he reflected that he was an owner of it, then Denry was attracted and delighted, and his heart beat. For this pink thing was the symbol and result of the whole affair, and had the effect of a miracle on him. And he said to himself, never guessing how many thousands of men had said it before him, that a newspaper was the finest toy in the world. About 4 o'clock, the publisher, in shirt sleeves and an apron, came up to Mr Myson and respectfully asked him to step into the publishing office. Mr Myson stepped into the publishing office, and Denry with him, and they there beheld a small ragged boy with a bleeding nose and a bundle of dailies in his wounded hand. "Yes," the boy sobbed, "and they said they'd cut my eyes out and play marbles with 'em if they cotched me in Crown Square again." And he threw down the papers with a final yell. The two directors learnt that the delicate threat had been uttered by 4 Signal boys, who had objected to any fellow boys offering any paper other than the Signal for sale in Crown Square or anywhere else. Of course it was absurd. Still, absurd as it was, it continued. The central publishing offices of the Daily at Hanbridge, and its branch offices in the neighbouring towns, were like military hospitals, and the truth appeared to the directors that while the public was panting to buy copies of the Daily, the sale of the Daily was being prevented by means of a scandalous conspiracy on the part of Signal boys. For it must be understood that in the Five Towns people prefer to catch their newspaper in the street as it flies and cries. The Signal had a vast army of boys, to whom every year it gave a great fete. Indeed, the Signal possessed nearly all the available boys, and assuredly all the most pugilistic and strongest boys. Mr Myson had obtained boys only after persistent inquiry and demand, and such as he had found were not the fittest, and therefore were unlikely to survive. You would have supposed that in a district that never ceases to grumble about bad trade and unemployment, thousands of boys would have been delighted to buy the Daily at 4d. a dozen and sell it at 6d, but it was not so. On the second day, the dearth of boys at the offices of the Daily was painful. There was that magnificent enterprising newspaper waiting to be sold, and there was the great enlightened public waiting to buy, and scarcely any business could be done, because the Signal boys had established a reign of terror over their puny and upstart rivals. The situation was unthinkable. Still, unthinkable as it was, it continued. Mr Myson had thought of everything except this. Naturally, it had not occurred to him that an immense and serious effort for the general weal was going to be blocked by a gang of tatterdemalions. He complained with dignity to the Signal, and was informed with dignity by the Signal that the Signal could not be responsible for the playful antics of its boys in the streets, that, in short, the Five Towns was a free country. In the latter proposition, Mr Myson did not concur. After trouble in the persuasion of parents, astonishing how indifferent the Five Towns parent was to the loss of blood by his offspring, a case reached the police court. At the hearing the Signal gave a solicitor a watching brief, and that solicitor expressed the Signal's horror of carnage. The evidence was excessively contradictory, and the stipendiary dismissed the summons with a good joke. The sole definite result was that the boy whose father had ostensibly brought the summons got his ear torn within a quarter of an hour of leaving the court. Boys will be boys. Still, the Daily had so little faith in human nature that it could not believe that the Signal was not secretly encouraging its boys to be boys. It could not believe that the Signal, out of a sincere desire for fair play and for the highest welfare of the district, would willingly sacrifice nearly half its circulation and a portion of its advertisement revenue. And the hurt tone of Mr Myson's leading articles seemed to indicate that, in Mr Myson's opinion, his older rival ought to do everything in its power to ruin itself. The Signal never spoke of the fight. The Daily gave shocking details of it every day. The struggle trailed on through the weeks. Then Denry had one of his ideas. An advertisement was printed in the Daily for 200 able-bodied men to earn 2 shillings for working 6 hours a day. An address different from the address of the Daily was given. By a ruse, Denry procured the insertion of the advertisement in the Signal also. "We must expend our capital on getting the paper on to the streets," said Denry. "That's evident. We'll have it sold by men. We'll soon see if the Signal ragamuffins will attack them. And we won't pay 'em by results. We'll pay 'em a fixed wage. That'll fetch 'em. And a commission on sales into the bargain. Why, I wouldn't mind engaging 500 men. Swamp the streets. That's it. Hang expense. And when we've done the trick we can go back to the boys. They'll have learnt their lesson." And Mr Myson agreed, and was pleased that Denry was living up to his reputation. The state of the earthenware trade was supposed that summer to be worse than it had been since 1869, and the grumblings of the unemployed were prodigious, even seditious. Mr Myson, therefore, as a measure of precaution, engaged a couple of policemen to ensure order at the address, and during the hours named in the advertisement as a rendezvous for respectable men in search of a well-paid job. Having regard to the thousands of perishing families in the Five Towns, he foresaw a rush and a crush of eager breadwinners. Indeed, the arrangements were elaborate. 40 minutes after the advertised time for the opening of the reception of respectable men in search of money, 4 men had arrived. Mr Myson, mystified, thought that there had been a mistake in the advertisement. But there was no mistake in the advertisement. A little later 2 more men came. Of the 6, 3 were tipsy, and the other 3 absolutely declined to be seen selling papers in the streets. 2 were abusive, 1 facetious. Mr Myson did not know his Five Towns. Nor did Denry. A Five Towns man, when he can get neither bread nor beer, will keep himself and his family on pride and water. The policeman went off to more serious duties. 3. Then came the announcement of the 35th anniversary of the Signal, and of the processional fête by which the Signal was at once to give itself a splendid spectacular advertisement and to reward and enhearten its boys. The Signal meant to liven up the streets of the Five Towns on that great day by means of a display of all the gilt chariots of Snape's circus in the main thoroughfare. Many of the boys would be in the gilt chariots. Copies of the anniversary number of the Signal would be sold from the gilt chariots. The idea was excellent, and it showed that after all the Signal was getting just a little more afraid of its young rival than it had pretended to be. For, strange to say, after a trying period of hesitation, the Five Towns Daily was slightly on the upward curve, thanks to Denry. Denry did not mean to be beaten by the puzzle which the Daily offered to his intelligence. There the Daily was, full of news and with quite an encouraging show of advertisements, printed on real paper with real ink, and yet it would not go. Notoriously the Signal earned a net profit of at the very least £5,000 a year, whereas the Daily earned a net loss of at the very least £60 a week, and of that 60 quite a third was Denry's money. He could not explain it. Mr Myson tried to rouse the public by passionately stirring up extremely urgent matters, such as the smoke nuisance, the increase of the rates, the park question, German competition, technical education for apprentices. But the public obstinately would not be roused concerning its highest welfare to the point of insisting on a regular supply of the Daily. If a mere 5,000 souls had positively demanded daily a copy of the Daily, and not slept till boys or agents had responded to their wish, the troubles of the Daily would soon have vanished. But this ridiculous public did not seem to care which paper was put into its hand in exchange for its halfpenny, so long as the sporting news was put there. It simply was indifferent. It failed to see the importance, to such an immense district, of having 2 flourishing and mutually opposing daily organs. The fundamental boy difficulty remained ever present. And it was the boy difficulty that Denry perseveringly and ingeniously attacked, until at length the Daily did indeed possess some sort of brigade of its own, and the bullying and slaughter in the streets, so amusing to the inhabitants, grew a little less one-sided. A week or more before the Signal's anniversary day, Denry heard that the Signal was secretly afraid lest the Daily's brigade might accomplish the marring of its gorgeous procession, and that the Signal was ready to do anything to smash the Daily's brigade. He laughed. He said he did not mind. About that time hostilities were rather acute. blood was warming, and both papers, in the excitation of rivalry, had partially lost the sense